for this role as Edgar Allan Poe, was it different preparing for someone who wasn't actually a real person?
Was it different than what?
Was it different, preparing for a role where someone isn't a real person or a fictional character, and preparing for someone who is a figure that everyone knows?
Yeah, it's different, but in a way, whenever you're making a film about someone, it's kind of a fiction because unless you really know what happened.
Yeah.
So this one was kind of an interesting conceit, and it was kind of like the meta version of telling Poe. If we told a biopic about Poe, right, it would have to be linear, and you'd say, Artie was born here, and then this happened, and you could kind of play around with time in a very simple way, but by having a fantasy, kind of like, in Amadeus and Salieri didn't really happen, but it gets you clued into classical music in such a cool way. It's a story. So having Poe become a character in one of his stories, and he has to sort of deconstruct his own stories, then you get Poe on his own work. And then we have loads of letters and biographies where we could pull actually said and put it into this fiction. So it's a fantasy. Actually, I think it allowed us to tell more about his stories and show him stories about his creative process and get more of his quotes in and his language in, because it sort of made it active.
You mentioned how it's coming out of the detective genre, and that's actually something I very much liked, as it kind of goes off of a lot of Poe's writing. And something I was curious about is, in the process of shooting it, did you ever get to a point where you thought, or perhaps you worried, maybe this isn't something Poe would have done, or maybe this isn't ringing true with his work, or perhaps vice versa? Was there anything you came with that you thought was perfectly fitting with the tone of something that he created, over a century ago?
Well, the good news about that is that those were all his stories. So,
right.
The Telltale Heart,
You're curious, in working through the role of Poe, did you find anything that you think between his character and you as a person, there are any similarities, or anything that you could from your own, obviously, life that would be reflected in Poe?
Yeah, that's the horror. That's the horror. That's the horror. That's the horror. That's the horror of Poe, is that we can see ourselves in him, right?
Right, for sure.
I don't think I'm as maybe I think he's like an archetype figure because he represents kind of that shadow world. He's like a Jungian shadow archetype, and he has all the shame and all the things that you want to hide, and the sorrows, and he once said, I almost feel like I could hear the sound of darkness as it rushed over the horizon towards me to consume me. So all that part of us that feels frightened of the future, frightened of all of our fear phobias, he seems to be like an archetype for that.
Look, if anybody wants to know, I'm on Twitter, and I'll be doing stuff. I'm at John Cusack on Twitter. It's a fan account, so if people want to